So this is only a portion of probably the single largest croissant failure in the history of proof. In the sense that, now on a daily basis we make a lot of croissants. So if we mess up a mix, which is what happened in this case, and if somehow it goes all the way through to the final product without being caught, you end up with a pretty large failure. So we held on to these for 24 hours because I want to get the most out of this failure possible. So I've got Brandon here, and they kind of look like a chocolate croissant, kind of. And then when I open them up, I'm expecting all the layers that you're normally used to seeing. And instead I have practically bread. And so you wonder, well, what the heck happened here? For our team, even though it's a very expensive fail, learning this is not a bad thing. It's a good thing to be identified. So Brandon, cheers to you.
To bad product.
To bad product. So it doesn't taste right. It tastes like something else. And so grab a pinch of Harriet. This is Harriet in the raw form. And what's interesting, what do you think?
It's this.
That's the taste. It's one missing ingredient that yields this result. It's salt. So we now have, like, the moment that you taste the final product and compare it to Harriet, the taste being virtually the same, even though I've doctored this with butter and sugar, you know that one ingredient was missing. Essentially, through the entire process, these croissants now were fermenting at a completely different rate. Salt inhibits fermentation, and our croissant dough is extended for 3 days, typically. So by not having salt, you're essentially just refreshing the sourdough starter in the croissant dough. And now we took it for a long time. We did the mix, the shaping, the lamination, the final bake-off. We actually did the bake-off in 2 separate facilities, because what's interesting is that this croissant dough failed in Mesa yesterday and failed at this facility today, just based on our production timelines. We typically transport the product in the middle of its process when it's in a cold fermentation state. We proof it and bake it off the next day at our satellite facilities. So we knew this was coming, and it was a really kind of rough couple days on the team. We had to rush an entire batch of croissant dough forward, and so it all worked out. We had to run extra deliveries, and some people had to work extended hours to make up for this, but it's just an omission of salt. And the big benefit is now somebody like Brandon can identify that, oh, that was a salt issue. But we also had a chance to think about something which is a little bit more pressing, and that's how do we as a larger team communicate better? Because we have disjointed processes now. So the person who mixed is not the person who's laminating, is not the person who is rolling up the croissant dough, is not the person who's proofing and baking the croissant dough. That could be 5 separate people on our team right now. And what's interesting is that all along the way, there was suspicions on this dough, but the team didn't necessarily share those suspicions with the next people coming in to continue the process. So the dough was proofing very quickly through the process because it didn't have salt, meaning it was puffy on the lamination table. That should have been an indicator. But by itself, it was just viewed as, oh, well, maybe it was in the proofer and the bulk fermentation stage a little too long. Now, couple that with the fact that the people who were stretching the dough were also suspicious of it, And then the person who was mixing that day happened to have a problem with salt all morning. And this could have been identified sooner. And that would have obviously saved, because maybe we would have still lost the batch. But the expense in the croissant dough is once you laminate that butter in, or add the chocolate, or add the almond frangipan. And of course, every time that you touch the dough, you know, there's also an expense in everybody's time. And now the whole team has a rare opportunity to know that dough without salt essentially tastes like sourdough starter. And that in of itself, you know, is a very expensive but valuable lesson for our crew in identifying future problems. So were you surprised?
I thought it was like a folding issue, or it never got folded properly, and so it didn't get the layers or anything at first. And so the flavor of it was a complete surprise.
Yeah, so because like looking at it visually, you would think what Brandon said, you know, maybe something happened in the process of making the layers. But actually the layers were made beautifully. It turned into what's like a brioche. And that shows you kind of the power of, you know, the sourdough starter itself, that the salt is not just a component that improves the flavor, which it is, because, I mean, would you...
I wouldn't serve that. I wouldn't serve that to an enemy at dinner.
We actually had a lot of people, because we talked about this on our social media, and by the time you're watching this, you would have had to go back in our social media quite a ways. But, you know, we talked about this transparently, and a lot of people said, well, why didn't you, you know, sell these at a discount? But they don't, I mean, it would be like selling Harriet to eat at a discount. It's, you know, no offense to Harriet, but by herself, she doesn't really taste that great. You know, it's not until the bread is leavened that it tastes good. So anyway, you know, one for the record books, really big fail, but something that we can learn from. And, you know, nonetheless, it's going to happen. Like, it would be a mistake to be angry. But I could understand why somebody would be. Certainly at different times of proof, I would have reacted, you know, worse to a mistake like this, even when I made it, you know, early on. But the truth is, like, at the end of the day, it's just bread, right? Like, nobody died, nobody got hurt. It's just a failed batch of bread, and you know, as unfortunate as it is, these types of mistakes are what build better bakers when we take the lessons from them. And in this case, there's a really nice lesson that we don't actually get to share on a daily basis. I could tell you that, you know, unsalted croissant dough would taste like sourdough starter, but you probably wouldn't believe me if I said, hey, this cinnamon roll is going to taste more like sourdough starter than it is like what you would expect a cinnamon roll. So anyway, if you go to your bakery and somebody tries to pass you what looks like a decent cinnamon roll on the outside and it tastes like sourdough starter, you should suspect the salt.